Hi everybody, welcome back to week 8 of the Manic Pixar Dream Girl series presented by Earned Happy Endings, aka me, your host, Lily Holman. So let's talk Boundin. So Boundin was released in 2003 ahead of this little film you might have heard of called The Incredibles. So odds are a lot of you have seen it if you've seen Pixar films. If you haven't, don't worry. As per usual, I will provide lots of background details. But you should go see it. It's very fun, despite the flaws I'm going to be pointing out within it. It's very fun. It's very cute. And it has a very lovely kind of core message, which is why we're talking about it in the first place, because it is the first of these Pixar films with heart, and it's the kind of sets groundwork for how they tell these stories, how they tell these stories that are a bit more moralistic, in a good way, not in a lecturing way, but more in a let's acknowledge our human experience and help each other through it type of way. So this video is going to tackle the first act, like normally do, break it up by act and different elements that make each thing more effective and why each thing is there. And then we'll move on to the second act. It's going to be quite predictable. Alright, so we have the 2003 film Boundin. In the film, a popular dancing lamb has to learn to keep going again after he gets shaved against his will. In his world, his new baldness causes him to lose his claim to fame, which was this gorgeous fluffy coat, gorgeously animated, and which gained him all the respect of his friends. And rather than respect, it was really kind of hero worship of his friends. And so he loses this because he's shaved against his will, because he is a sheep, and that's what ends up happening to when humans and sheep interact. But he is helped along with the advice of a wise old jackalope, who advises him to get rid of the, quote, pink kink in his think, unquote, by learning to bound, and rebound, end quote, hence Boundin. Quotes are evidence to the fact that the Boundin is the only Pixar short film as of this summer to include dialogue. If you saw Inside Out, which I hope you did, it had lava beforehand. Lava has the same form of dialogue Boundin actually has. A little less overt, but there's a song, and the song expresses the feelings of the characters accurately. But as of when I wrote this, it was the only film to include dialogue, and the Boundin and Lava are the only films to include dialogue. Day and Night, which we'll talk about later, has a section with some spoken word, but it's not dialogue, and it's a radio broadcast, not expressed by any of the characters within the film. So it's a bit different. We'll tackle that later. So Boundin is set to a song delivered by Bud Luckey, who also wrote and directed Boundin. Bud is really cool. He got to start on Sesame Street, and this is his baby. It's his creation. And while the song makes the message of the film very clear, it's a very clever song. It has a really interesting message. It ends up telling the story more than the visuals or the actions of the characters end up telling the story. It's much more about the song than the film itself. And so when we compare it to the films that we've been watching without dialogue, it becomes evident that the advantages of silent filmmaking lie in the fact that we get to experience these actions along with the characters and learn through that, as opposed to being told how we should feel. We actually feel it. So it's just a bit more of a visceral reaction. The messages Boundin's going for are just as intelligent and heartfelt, but it's just a method of delivery. So, despite what the clarity that the lyrics give to the film and the cleverness of them, they end up detracting slightly from its emotional resonance, and we'll see how that unfolds. But that means that there are a lot of wonderful advantages to Boundin that kind of we can add or recognize of our toolbox of Pixar filmmaking strategies. So the first act of Boundin is an introduction to the world the lamb will eventually lose. Makes sense. We need to know why it's a tragedy that he gets shaved. It's a world of joy and energy, and it comes across visually as well as sonically. So in this part of the film, the narration is almost an incidental, so it complements the image more and enforces the positive emotions of the film with rhyme. It's all rhyming. It's, again, very clever. And especially in the first act, when it doesn't really take the place of anything else, it's more supportive, it works very well. And so the initial shot is really cool because it shows off more moving camera, which was introduced way back in Red's Dream, which again kind of takes advantage of the three-dimensional nature of computer animation. And in this specific instance, it follows some dancing fish up to a rock, where the main character, the lamb, who doesn't have a name, can be gendered any which way you want. Again, Bud Lucky made it. I might refer to him as a he, just because of convenience, but not specifically gendered. Could very well be a she or a z. So it follows. So along the way, we get introduced to the Western Plain that is basically as much of a star of the film as the lamb is. Because Bud Lucky grew up in Montana, he very specifically wanted it to take place in a Montana-like setting, and you can see it in the world surrounding. Incidentally, that's a lot of the strength that comes in the later film Cars. They capture being out west quite beautifully, and this is the first example of that. So, like I said, it takes advantage of the 3D, just like in Red's Dream, because it moves very fluidly and gets to show off that realistic world of Montana. Like, that opening shot makes it so that we actively notice the setting more than just incidentally appreciate it. It's going to be highlighted by the film. It's not just going to be noticed by people like me who are dissecting it. And so but the thing about this is that it could very easily become an opportunity to show off and therefore call attention to the filmmaking apparatus, which is just a dangerous thing to do, especially when you're dealing with audiences of all ages, where it's less about the filmmaking, or if it's about filmmaking that's in the background, because entertaining needs to be the priority. And if you're dealing with an art film that's bringing attention to the apparatus, you need to be thinking very carefully about that. So the way that Lucky avoids this is that the dancing fish are incentive for the moving camera movement, so we get the best of both worlds. We don't really notice the moving camera, but we get the benefits of the moving camera. And so the world becomes established as a setting as opposed to a technical display. And then this will be omnipresent for the rest of the film. You'll always see the moving camera, even in shots that could have easily been static. So take notice of that, because it adds energy to the frame, complements the music, which is constantly moving, and builds to the final climax. But in this beginning, it is an introduction to the world, the style, and the tone. So we follow this dancing fish. It's a lot of talk for a very brief amount of time, but then we settle on the lamb waiting on the rock. And so we don't quite break the fourth wall here, but we come very close, because the lamb seems almost unaware of the camera and the narration. Oh, sorry, not unaware. He's almost aware. Or Z is almost aware of it, and begins to put on a show as soon as the camera reaches the lamb. So, like, the lamb waits, camera rise, the lamb starts dancing. And it fits its character that this rock is a stage and gives the animator a chance to show off their character animation. The lamb is very intricately designed, and he is the most complicated character so far, with very pretentious, cocky body language and stuck-up facial characteristics. So faces are far more influential in this film than in others. That being said, we've talked about faces extensively in Tintoy and Presto, and even a bit in Lifted. So this isn't new territory for us, but at the time it was kind of new territory for Pixar. And we get to see the big expressive eyes again, like we've seen in Disney shorts. But also the new thing we see is these simple dance moves that do most of the communicating, for the characters with less intricate character design, which are the smaller animals. So the lamb is dancing, but his friends are all dancing as well. And for those, they are literally recycled characters from old Pixar movies. You see a lot of Finding Nemo fish in there. So that's kind of a complicated reasoning behind that. Where really, ideally, we won't notice the recycled characters. However, the way they treat it in the commentary, if we do end up noticing it, it's because these characters function a lot like the Luxo Ball and the Andre Clock in Red Stream, and that they link the film to previous Pixar productions and therefore reinforce the Pixar brand. But in this film, they are the lamb's backup dancers, and mostly are just there to show off their joy, show off the stardom of this lamb, and they dance in response to the lamb and therefore physically represent the way they look up to him. And so these opening sequences end up setting up a community, and it's the community that the lamb is about to lose. It's a community where when the lamb dances, his friends follow, but as soon as he gets shaved, that's when it all ends. So that's the introduction to Boundin. We're going to see, obviously, dramatic changes due to the plot, but we'll see the world change around him, and then we'll see the very problematic third act, where you'll understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about in terms of dialogue. But I really like the first act of Boundin, and I actually really like the second act of Boundin. I think they're very fun, they're very cute, and the song is very inspiring. So, take a breather, and go make sure your friends are better than the friends in Boundin, and come back to me, and we'll talk about the second act.